In November of 2004, U.S. Navy pilots launched from an aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean for what was supposed to be a routine training mission. There was nothing unusual in the plan. Clear skies, open water, standard procedures. But before the jets even reached their training area, something unexpected happened. Radar operators aboard the USS Princeton had been tracking unknown objects for several days. At first, the contacts looked like errors. Strange returns appeared at very high altitude. Then they dropped rapidly. Then they stabilized. The behavior did not match aircraft. It did not match weather. And it did not match known radar glitches. The operators recalibrated their systems. They checked different modes. They confirmed with other ships. The track stayed. Eventually, command made a decision. Two F/A 18 fighter jets were redirected to investigate one of the contacts. One of the pilots was Commander David Fravor. As the jets approached the target area, the pilots noticed something unusual below them. The ocean surface was disturbed. Not by wind, not by waves. There was a large patch of white water, as if something heavy was moving just beneath the surface. And directly above that disturbance, there was an object. It was white, smooth, featureless, roughly the size of a small aircraft. Commander Fravor later said it looked like a Tic Tac. There were no wings, no exhaust, no visible propulsión. The object was hovering. As Fravor began to descend toward it, the object started to move. Not randomly. It responded. When the jet changed direction, the object adjusted. When the jet descended, the object climbed. The movements were sharp and controlled. At one point, Fravor attempted a standard intercept maneuver, tightening his turn to close the distance. Instead of fleeing, the object rose to meet him. Then, without warning, it accelerated. There was no gradual increase in speed, no visible effort. The object went from near stationary to gone in seconds. No sonic boom, no trail. It simply disappeared. Moments later, radar operators reported something even stranger. The unknown contact had reappeared, not near the original location, but at the pilot's planned rendezvous point, approximately 60 miles away, and it appeared there before the jets arrived. At that moment, the encounter stopped being just a visual curiosity. It became a coordinated event involving pilots, radar, and command. Over the following days, additional flights were launched to gather more data. This time, aircraft were equipped with advanced targeting pods. These systems combine infrared imaging, stabilization, and tracking. They do not rely on human interpretation alone. One of these flights recorded infrared footage of an object. The video is short, grainy, unimpressive at first glance. A small shape against the sky, but the object appears to move against the wind. The tracking system struggles to maintain lock. And then, suddenly, the object exits the frame at high speed. Years later, this footage would be officially confirmed by the U.S. Department of Defense as authentic. Not explained, just authentic. At the time of the incident, however, the pilots were left with no clear answers. They attempted to classify what they had seen. A drone? No known drone could perform those maneuvers. An experimental aircraft? Unlikely, given the location and lack of coordination. A natural phenomenon? Then why did it appear to react to the jets? Each explanation solved one problem and created another. After the encounters, the pilots were debriefed. Data was collected. Recordings were taken. And then, the incident faded into silence. For more than a decade, the Tic Tac encounter remained largely unknown to the public. Until 2017. That year, major media outlets reported on a series of Navy encounters with unidentified objects. The Tic Tac incident was at the center of those reports. Soon after, the U.S. government acknowledged something rare. that Navy pilots had encountered objects in restricted airspace, that these encounters had been recorded, and that the objects were not immediately identified. They used a new term, not UFO, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. The change in language mattered. It signaled caution, and it signaled uncertainty, because the Tic Tac case was no longer just a story told by pilots. It was a documented incident without a clear conclusion. And that raises a simple question. If an unknown object could operate near one of the most powerful naval forces on Earth, be observed, be tracked, be recorded, and still remain unidentified, then what exactly was encountered that day? That question is where this case truly begins. To understand why this case refuses to fade, you need to focus on two things: the environment and the behavior. A carrier strike group is not casual airspace. It is one of the most monitored military environments on the planet. Multiple ships, multiple radars, multiple communication channels. If something unknown appears there, it becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes a safety issue and potentially a security issue. That is why the early radar reports matter. According to several accounts, the Princeton's radar operators saw unusual contacts repeatedly over multiple days. Not once, repeatedly. They were not tracking a single drifting object. They were tracking something that appeared, moved, and returned. That pattern is what triggers action in a professional setting. Now, let's return to the moment the pilots arrived. The disturbed water is easy to overlook, but it is one of the strangest details. The pilots described a patch of white water as if something large was just beneath the surface. If that disturbance was unrelated, it might be coincidence. But the pilots perceived it as connected. They saw the object directly above it. That matters because it suggests the encounter may not have been purely aerial. But we have to be careful. A clue is not a conclusion. Now, the object itself. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. A smooth white shape. No visible wings. No tal. No exhaust. The object did not fly like a plane. It did not hover like a helicopter. It moved in clean, deliberate shifts. And this is where the case becomes difficult to dismiss as a simple misidentification. Because the behavior described is not the behavior of a balloon. A balloon drifts. It responds slowly to wind. It does not mirror a fighter jet. But the pilots described the object adjusting as they adjusted, almost as if it was tracking them. Again, that does not prove intelligence. It only suggests responsiveness. And responsiveness is one of the key reasons this incident stayed in the pilots' minds. Then there is the acceleration. You could debate the exact speed. You could debate distances and angles. But the core claim is simple. The object departed extremely fast, extremely cleanly. No gradual climb, no wide turn, just a sudden exit. And then comes the detail that turns the story into a puzzle. The radar reported the object appearing at the rendezvous point. If true, it implies the object moved to a planned location far away in very little time. If false, it still implies confusion in sensor data strong enough to convince a carrier group that something was moving through their airspace. Either way, it is not comforting. Now, a reasonable person hears this and asks the obvious question. If this was real, why don't we have a clear official answer? The short answer is that military information does not move like public information. The military collects data, classifies data, stores data, and when something involves sensitive systems, the most protected detail may not be the object itself. It may be the sensors. What can the radar really see? How far can it track? How does it filter noise? These capabilities are strategic. So even if the military had a strong hypothesis, public disclosure would still be limited. But limited disclosure creates another problem. It creates space, and space gets filled with speculation. Some people jump straight to extraterrestrials. Others jump straight to it's all fake. Both jumps are emotional shortcuts. So let's stay with what this case actually gives us. A professional response. Jets were redirected. Pilots made contact. Follow-up flights were launched. Data was collected. That is the behavior of a system responding to something it cannot immediately categorize. Now, let's talk about the follow-up footage because people often misunderstand what it represents. The video does not prove aliens. The video proves something more modest but more important, that the encounter was taken seriously enough to be recorded by advanced systems. And later, the government did not deny the video. It confirmed it. That alone changes the tone, because most myths collapse when officials simply say, "That never happened." Here, the response was different. The response was, "The footage is real," and then silence about what it is. Now we are ready for the next step, the explanations. Because the Tic Tac case is famous partly because every explanation feels incomplete. If it was a balloon, why the controlled movement? If it was sensor error, why the visual contact? If it was a secret U.S. project, why operate near a carrier group without clear coordination? If it was foreign technology, why has the world not visibly shifted around such a massive advantage? These questions do not prove any one answer, but they do show why the file stays open. In the next part, we'll run the main explanations through a serious filter, not to debunk the case, but to see which explanations survive the most basic tests, and which ones collapse under their own contradictions. Now we test the explanations, not for drama, for survival, because a good explanation should do three things. It should match the environment, it should match the behavior, and it should not create bigger problems than the mystery itself. Let's start with the most common category. Explanation 1. Misidentification. A balloon, a distant aircraft, a bird, a glare. Misidentification is real. It happens constantly. But the Tic Tac case is not built on a single fleeting glimpse. The pilots described a clear shape at close range. Smooth, white, featureless, no wings, no visible propulsión. Could pilots still be wrong? Yes. Distance and scale over water can be deceptive. But misidentification usually leaves a trail of uncertainty. In this case, the claims are confident, and the behavior described is not what you expect from a balloon. A balloon drifts with the wind. It does not mirror a fighter jet's movement. So misidentification alone struggles to carry the full weight. Now we move to the strongest skeptical category. Explanation 2. Sensor error. Radar can show false tracks. Atmospheric conditions can create anomalies. Targeting pods can lose lock. Camera movement can create the impression of sudden speed. This explanation has power because it does not require anything exotic. It only requires imperfect instruments. But it has a weakness. It must explain more than one system. The story includes repeated radar contacts over multiple days, plus a close visual encounter, plus follow-up recordings. A sensor error can explain one layer, maybe even two, but the more layers you add, the more you need coincidence. And professional environments do not usually run on coincidence. They run on patterns. So sensor error remains possible, but incomplete. Now we turn to the most tempting, serious explanation. Explanation 3. A secret U.S. program. If you want a non-alien answer that can still explain extreme performance, this is it. A classified drone, a test platform, a new propulsion system. The U.S. military has conducted secret programs before, so the idea is not ridiculous. But again, context matters. Why test an unknown platform near an active carrier group? Testing their risks, accidents, and exposure. Dozens of sensors could capture data. If secrecy was the priority, this is not how you protect it. Unless the test was not about the craft. Unless the test was about the fleet. If the goal was to see how the carrier group reacts to an unknown contact, then operating nearby makes sense. But that shifts the story. It becomes an internal secrecy story. A story where the Navy pilots were not fully informed. And that possibility is unsettling in its own way. Now consider the next explanation. Explanation 4. Foreign technology. Arrival power testing surveillance or drones near U.S. forces. This is plausible on paper, but it is heavy because if a foreign platform can enter carrier airspace and outperform Navy jets, that implies a massive strategic leap. It would be a world-changing advantage. And yet, we have not seen a world that looks like that. No obvious follow-up demonstration. No clear strategic shift. This doesn't disprove the idea, but it makes it less likely as a clean answer. Now, there is one more explanation category, and it is often ignored. Explanation 5. A real object, but an unknown category. Not aliens. Not a secret program we can name. Just something that remains unidentified because the data is incomplete. That could mean an advanced drone. It could mean an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. It could mean a sensor interaction that creates a real track from multiple inputs. This category is frustrating because it doesn't deliver a satisfying label, but it matches reality. The world produces edge cases, and sometimes those edge cases appear in the worst possible place. Near expensive equipment, near armed forces, near restricted airspace. Now, you might be thinking, so what is the best explanation? The honest answer is that we don't have enough public data to close the case. We have accounts. We have confirmed footage. We have official acknowledgement. But we do not have full sensor logs. We do not have complete timelines. We do not have every recording. And without that, certainty is not possible. But we can still do something useful. We can identify why the case remains open. It remains open because each explanation creates a new problem. If it was misidentification, the behavior is hard to fit. If it was sensor error, the layers stack up. If it was a secret U.S. program, the risk and exposure are strange. If it was foreign tech, the strategic implications are enormous. And if it was an unknown category, the uncomfortable truth remains. Something operated near a carrier group, and nobody publicly explained it. Now, at this point in the story, we need to zoom out, because the Tic Tac case is not famous only for what happened in 2004. It is famous for what happened after. When the story surfaced, it changed how the military treated the topic. Pilots were encouraged to report. Procedures were updated. And that suggests the incident was not treated as a joke. It was treated as an ongoing data problem. In the next part, we'll connect the Tic Tac to the larger shift. How the language changed. How reporting changed. And why UAP became a modern category instead of an old UFO cliché. The Tic Tac case became famous for one reason. Not because it proved a spectacular answer, but because it forced official institutions to admit uncertainty. And that is rare. For decades, UFO was a cultural punchline, a word associated with hoaxes, tabloids, and easy fantasies. That made serious reporting difficult. Pilots saw unusual things, but many stayed silent. They did not want to be ridiculed. They did not want career damage. So the system lost data. And without data, unknowns stay unknown. But after cases like Tic Tac entered public view, the tone changed. Not overnight, but noticeably. The Navy introduced clearer reporting pathways for unusual aerial encounters. The goal was practical: collect consistent information, reduce stigma, improve safety. Because even if every UAP turns out to be something ordinary, an unidentified object near aircraft is still a risk. A drone can cause a collision. A balloon can damage an engine. A misread contact can trigger dangerous decisions. So reporting matters. But the shift also signaled something else. That the military had encountered enough unresolved incidents to take the category seriously. And that brings us back to what the Tic Tac actually represents. At minimum, it represents a documented moment where trained observers and advanced systems encountered something they could not immediately identify. That is the conservative truth. Now, what does the case not prove? It does not prove extraterrestrial life. It does not prove a secret global conspiracy. It does not prove a single explanation at all. But it does prove a gap. A gap between what the public assumes and what the data sometimes shows. The public assumes restricted airspace is controlled. The public assumes the military has answers. And yet, here is an incident where the public answer was essentially, we don't know. Now, skeptics will say the answer is simple. It was a chain of sensor errors and misinterpretations. And that is possible. But even that skeptical answer carries a warning. If our sensors and interpretations can produce an impossible story inside a high-tech environment, that is a serious problem. Because it means uncertainty exists where we assume certainty. Believers will say the opposite, that the object's behavior points to technology beyond human capability. And that is also possible. But possible is not proven. A disciplined approach requires restraint. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with the most honest conclusion you can make from public information. The Tic Tac case remains unresolved, not because nobody has ideas, but because none of the publicly available explanations closes the case cleanly without creating new contradictions. And that is exactly why it became a landmark story. It is the moment when the modern UAP era became visible, when the language changed, when reporting changed, when the topic moved from cultural noise into institutional concern. Now, the final question is not what was it? Not yet. The final question is simpler and more unsettling. If this happened near one of the most monitored naval forces in the world, if it was observed, tracked, recorded, and still the public never received a clear conclusion, then how many similar incidents never reached the public at all? How many files stayed inside systems you will never see? How many encounters were shrugged off, misfiled, or ignored because reporting was risky? That question is the real echo of Tic Tac. Because even if the explanation is mundane, the pattern matters. And if the explanation is not mundane, the pattern matters even more. So here is the final thought I want to leave you with. A mystery does not need aliens to be serious. It only needs unanswered questions in the wrong place. And the Tic Tac case produced unanswered questions exactly where you would least expect them. Above open ocean, near armed aircraft, inside controlled airspace. Maybe one day, a full dataset will surface. Full radar logs, full sensor records, complete timelines. Maybe then the case will close, or maybe it will open wider. But until that happens, the Tic Tac remains what the government itself implicitly admitted, an unidentified phenomenon, a real event with an unknown label. And that is why it still matters. Because the sky has not promised to make sense. We only assumed it would.